honorable task by the President of the ESC to have the honor to open the plenary session today. First of all, I would like to wish all of you a very happy new year and all the best to you and the people you love. And let's hope that this crucial year will be very prosperous and the end for the European Union as well. So, having said that, I would like to ask you to proceed with the business in hand. And the first request that I would put to your attention is to kindly adopt the draft agenda of the plenary session.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to propose for the approval of plenary a change to the agenda as established and drawn up yesterday following on from the Bureau meeting. Until the start of yesterday afternoon, the agenda for our plenary meeting included a debate and a decision for an opinion of which I am the rapporteur. I was informed to my great surprise at the end of yesterday afternoon that the Bureau decided to take that item off the agenda, which I think is not acceptable, and it goes against any code of ethics or code of conduct, and I know of what I speak. I was the president of the group for 8 years. I was president of section for 4 years. 2.5 years I was president of the committee, and I have never proposed a decision without in advance consulting the people directly affected. And in this case, there were two individuals who have been directly affected. Myself first as rapporteur, followed by the president of the section, the SOC section. I'm sorry to note that the president of the SOC section was speaking as spokesperson of Group 1 rather than of the section as a whole. This way of behaving is totally anti-democratic. It runs against any code of ethics. We are a democracy. I am not questioning anyone's rights to submit a counter opinion. What I am contesting is that by means of an agreement between two presidents, without giving me the possibility of explaining my point of view, the Bureau members were practically presented with a fait accompli, which is why, Madam President, I submit to plenary that we modify this agenda and reinstate for debate tomorrow, as was initially planned, the examination of the opinion of which I am the rapporteur. And I would take advantage of this opportunity to welcome Michel Barnier amongst us.
So thank you very much for your intervention. Of course, we will deal with shortly, because now we have with us Mr. Barnier, and therefore I would like to return the presidency over the plenary to the President of the ESC, and then we get back to the usual agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, and this is the first plenary of the new year. Happy New Year to all of you. Je passe au français, donc je vous...
Let me switch to French, so please use your headphones if need be. I would say that following on from our first debate with the chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, he's done us the honour of coming back to our plenary, continuing this good relationship, and now he's promised back in November that he would come back to us to update us. Michel Barnier, could I welcome you to our plenary session at a point in time where a risk of a Brexit, a no-deal Brexit, has never been as high. Only 9 weeks from the choice of the UK to become a third country. As you know, It's with great sadness that we accept something that we wanted to avoid. Nonetheless, I can only congratulate you and all of your team for your consistency vis-à-vis the Commission, Member States, councils, with the presence of the other institutions, for your flawless commitment and constant work to try to reach a balanced withdrawal agreement, which retains both the interests of the European Union and unity amongst the 27. The agreement, which was adopted by the 27 heads of state and government of the EU and Theresa May on the 25th of May. You negotiated an agreement which guarantees that the withdrawal will be an orderly one and ensures legal certainty for all once the treaty and EU rights no longer apply in the UK. Also, the political declaration approved gives us a consistent framework to construct strong relationships and cooperation partnerships with the United Kingdom. And in no case it can never be a conventional third country, for no other reason than for more than 40 years it's been a key part of European integration of our union. So it will become a third country, but it will be an entirely different one. As I said before we came into plenary, notwithstanding all these efforts and all of these agreements, today we are somewhat in the middle of nowhere, or at least that's the impression we have. I can assure you that the Economic and Social Committee intends to play its role alongside you to maintain strong links with UK civil society. I can only pay tribute to your commitment and that of your team to have had so many meetings in all of the member states throughout these lengthy negotiations, to meet with people, listen, to explain what is happening. You said that all of the stakeholders should prepare. We are ready. We are convinced that it is crucial that the links and the relationships established over these last 40 years with civil society should not be lost. They should be consolidated and new life should be breathed into them. We stand ready to play our role, either the 1st of April or if there's transition of any type, and above all in a future configuration where after an international agreement has been found at some point to consolidate the future of our relationship with the UK, there would be a structured space for permanent dialogue with EU and UK civil society, so that we can make a contribution with a roundtable, advisory committee or another formula to this work that we are doing together. Regardless of the scenario that will gain the upper hand in this very difficult point in time, and we are here to listen to what you have to say and to hear what you think may happen. Please be assured that we will never accept that the citizens would be the victims of this divorce, and that we are ready to play our role as representatives of organised civil society. All you have to do to us is say go. I'm happy to give you the floor, and following your statement, some of our committee members will take the floor. Thank you.
Many thanks. Dear President, dear Luca, dear George, ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the European Economic and Social Committee. And many thanks, Luca, for your kind words. Remember that on the 6th of July 2017, at the very, very start of the negotiation with the UK, I had the pleasure of addressing you. At the time, I said that everybody needed to prepare for Brexit. I also said that given the consequences of Brexit, it would be never business as usual. There can be no frictionless trade outside the single market and outside the customs union. And finally, I also said to you that all of us needed to be ready, in any case, for a no deal. Ladies and gentlemen, 18 months later, preparing for a no-deal scenario is more important than ever, even though I still hope that we can avoid this issue and this scenario. The UK will become a third country on the 29th of March, just 65 days from now. Last week, the House of Commons rejected the agreement between the European Council and the British government reached in November. We have, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we have to respect the parliamentary debate in the UK. And I want to respect the parliamentary debate, which is still ongoing. So I will not speculate on the choices that the UK now needs to make. But my responsibility is to say and to tell you what is at stake. And today there are two possible ways to leave the EU. There are two possible ways to leave the EU. Number one, an orderly withdrawal based on the agreement that we have built step by step with the UK from the last 18 months. Number two, a disorderly withdrawal, leaving the EU without a deal, is a default scenario, and there appears to be a majority in the House of Commons to oppose a no deal. But, ladies and gentlemen, opposing a no deal will not stop no deal from happening at the end of March. To stop no deal, a positive majority for another solution will need to emerge. This is the objective of the political consultations that Theresa May has started, and we hope, sincerely, we hope that this process will be successful. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in these difficult times, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss the result of the negotiations and the way forward to ratify our agreement. Whatever the final outcome, you, as representatives of entrepreneurs, trade unionists, leaders of NGOs, will have a decisive role in raising awareness amongst civil society. And I want also to thank, in particular, the chair of your Brexit monitoring group, Stefano Maglia, and all the rapporteurs and all those among you who have been working on Brexit. If I may, I will switch to French now and continue this presentation.
Since the start of these negotiations with the 27 member states and with the European Parliament, and with all of the meetings that you mentioned, President, in each of the member states where I visited 2 or 3 times, and I continue to do so. If you will, we have built together, co-built, as it were, this withdrawal agreement, taking on board the concerns expressed by the social partners, by civil society, obviously on the basis of all of this dialogue that I've had in Brussels, such as I had today, or in the capitals. And the result of this work is this treaty, this agreement of 585 pages, which is not a speech, a simple declaration. It's a treaty, an important agreement throughout its 585 pages of guarantees, responses, legal elements in the light of all of the legal uncertainties, economic, financial, technical, human and social uncertainties that Brexit created for everyone. In particular, ladies and gentlemen, I want to recall that in this draft treaty, which we have here and which remains here on the table, we agreed on 5 points to organise an orderly withdrawal for the UK. Firstly, the rights of 4.5 million citizens. was a priority for ourselves, the Parliament, and you yourselves, President. We're talking about 4.5 million European citizens established in the UK. We're also talking about 1.5 million UK citizens residing and working in one of the EU member states. All of those who establish themselves in their country of residence before the end of the transition period will be able to continue to benefit from the rights that they have acquired to reside in those countries, to work in those countries, to study there, or to have their families join them throughout their lives. That's the first point that we have in this withdrawal treaty. The second point, which is of concern to you as well, is that of the budget, which obviously is a major concern for all member states, but also in each of our member states, for farmers, for companies, the regions, associations, universities, who have projects financed from 2014 to 2020, a period of 7 years, receiving funding from the European budget. We agreed with the UK that all of the commitments that have been made with the EU28 be respected by the EU28. Third point. I'm not going to mention all of the other subjects. There are many subjects. They're all important. And they're linked to the exit of the UK. The UK has 700 international agreements which they'll be leaving. They'll be leaving Euratom. We had to come up with a solution to guarantee protection of 3,000 geographical indications for agriculture in the 28 EU member states to protect 1 million trademarks. Protected in Alicante together. There's data protection and many other subjects. The fourth major point, obviously, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on this, has to do with Ireland and Northern Ireland. And the European Council, the EU27, affirmed right from the start of the negotiations that it was committed and would remain committed to preserving the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, and in particular to not recreate a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, while preserving the integrity of the single market. And the European Parliament has always been on the same line. Theresa May herself, in December 2017, together with ourselves, made a commitment to avoid a return to a hard border under any circumstances, irrespective of the future relationship between her country and the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to implement this common commitment, we agreed in this treaty, in a specific protocol integrated to the treaty, on what we call the backstop, which is an insurance mechanism which stipulates, firstly, that the UK and the EU shall form a common customs territory. And this is a specific, insistent request from the UK in July of last year to consider what you call a UK-wide solution. So this was a UK proposal. It wasn't our idea at the outset of a backstop. And then the backstop states that the European rules necessary for the sound functioning of North-South cooperation and the integrity of our single market, of your single market, shall continue to apply in Northern Ireland. These rules obviously only have to do with goods. Why did the UK and the European Union wish of common accord, as of June 2017, that this issue of Ireland be dealt with and that a solution be found as part of the withdrawal agreement in that context, and not to leave it until future negotiations on its future relationship? Just so that everyone understands the serious nature of this point, let me recall 3 points. It is the UK decision to leave the Union. It's Brexit that creates the problem that we have to deal with in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Nothing else. This decision requires a specific solution, indeed, as was recognised by the erstwhile UK negotiator David Davis and Prime Minister Theresa May in autumn of 2017. It's Brexit that's creating the problem in Ireland. That's the first one. And we have to find solutions to the problems created by Brexit. Second point, the peace and reconciliation process in Northern Ireland remains fragile. The question of the backstop goes far beyond that of trade in goods. This process and this question has to do with men and women who need certainty. It is in no one's interest to prolong uncertainty beyond March 2019. Third point. Going beyond the Irish question itself, the border in Ireland is the border of our 27 countries. We're talking about the integrity of the single market, ladies and gentlemen, because, I mean, I'll recall it even if it's not necessary, any goods going into Northern Ireland, coming from the UK, the rest of the UK, from Britain, any goods going into Northern Ireland enters not only Northern Ireland, not just Ireland, it comes into Belgium, in Italy, in Poland, in France, or in Slovenia. Any goods entering Northern Ireland automatically, if there's no border, and we don't want a border, enters into the single market. And I can show you the list of checks that we carry out everywhere in each of your countries at the EU external border. The north of Finland, the Polish border, Greek or Portuguese border. We carry out a series of checks on all products coming into the single market to protect consumers, to protect companies, business, to protect the budget of European Union countries. These have to do with health checks, animal products, live animals, to combat animal diseases, checks, customs checks, tax checks for VAT or customs checks. The checks have to do with the lawfulness of products, if they comply with standards and rules that we have decided together in the single market, because the single market is more, as you know, than a free trade area. It's an integrated ecosystem with common norms and standards, and these checks are carried out vis-à-vis the external to the EU, which is why there are no internal checks. There are no checks between the island of Ireland and the continent, because Ireland is part of the European Union and the single market. So we have an obligation to protect consumers and to protect business, to carry out checks on products coming into the single market. So those are the three reasons why we have to deal with this issue in the withdrawal agreement. These are objective issues. There's no hostility in my attitude or any spirit of revenge or punishment. My responsibility, particularly here in front of the Economic and Social Committee, is to say what the problems are. So all we've tried to do and what we've done with the UK is find solutions to the problem created by Brexit. Obviously, this backstop is something that we do not wish to use. None of you wishes to make use of your home insurance, but you have home insurance, and it's not limited in time. If you pay your insurance premium, it's not time limited. It's insurance that you have, but you don't wish to use, and it's the same thing for the backstop. But we will do our level best to ensure that we don't need to use it. The agreement that we have commits us to do our level best together. What we say is our best endeavours, use our best endeavours to conclude before the end of December 2020 a further agreement which will replace the backstop and which would avoid using the backstop. And then finally, over and above these 4 points, the agreement that we have that I showed you provides for a transition period requested by the UK government through to the 31st of December 2020, which could be extended once with common agreement for a maximum of 24 months. And this is a choice offered to the UK which indeed would give us more time to avoid the implementation of the backstop. During this transition, the UK will retain all its rights and obligations of a member state, even if it will no longer take part, as it decided, in the decision-making process, and that will provide the necessary stability to business, to administrations, to adapt once for the future relationship, and that, ladies and gentlemen, will also allow us to continue to negotiate the detail of our future relationship. And I'd like to conclude on this future relationship because we stand ready to start this second negotiation as quickly as possible following the withdrawal of the UK and indeed the signing of the withdrawal agreement, as Presidents Tusk and Juncker clearly stated in a letter addressed to Theresa May on the 14th of January. The political declaration is the second document alongside the treaty, the agreement. It's perhaps easier to read. It's 26 pages long, and it sets out the framework for the future relationship, and this is something we've worked on a lot. It provides for an ambitious partnership in all areas having to do with security and all areas having to do with the economy and our life together. This partnership obviously will involve precise obligations which can allow us to ensure a level playing field in the social, environmental domain for consumers and for taxation or state aids. And I know, Chairman, how important you think these rules of the game are in terms of this objective for the level playing field will allow for the proper functioning of our social competitive market economy. I also know that you remain attentive, as does the European Parliament and the national parliaments in the EU 27 member states, that any trade agreement with the United Kingdom should allow to guarantee at one and the same time fair competition and protection which we deem necessary. This is not a minor matter. I'm somewhat of an optimist, and thinking in terms of future negotiations, I know that this will be the first time that we're going to have to negotiate many agreements with the UK, and in particular a free trade agreement. Unlike any free trade agreements that we've negotiated with 50 or so countries in the history of our trading relationships, recently with Japan, South Korea, or Canada, all of those past trade agreements, we negotiated them as part of a regulatory convergence procedure, convergence of rules and standards so that we can better trade with each other. As for the UK, it's the other way around. We're totally integrated thanks to the single market. And they're going to diverge. And the question is, what will happen with this divergence? Will it remain reasonable, a level playing field, or will it become a tool for tax, social, environmental dumping when it comes to consumer rights? So this is an important subject for the negotiations. Ladies and gentlemen, 18 months of negotiations, we've found a balanced agreement. I sincerely believe that. And given the difficult circumstances and the complexity of Brexit, it remains the best possible agreement. Now there is a decisive stage left, that of ratification. Without ratification, there will be neither a withdrawal agreement nor a transition period, nor will there be the mutual trust that we need in order to construct the future relationship on a sound basis. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we are not in, I'm talking globally here, we're not in this sort of standard trade negotiation. I think if we fail, we'll remain at the point where we are, the status quo. In the case of Brexit, it won't be status quo. If we fail in the Brexit negotiations, we will be stepping back, or at least the UK will be stepping back to a time before it was a member of the EU and the single market, when customs duties were part of the day-to-day life of our businesses. So this no-deal scenario can't be excluded as things stand today. So it's still necessary that the economic and social actors that you represent, but also civil society, needs to prepare for this scenario, as indeed we are preparing at European level. The 19th of December last, the European Commission presented 14 measures which the Union can activate unilaterally if a no deal were to be a source of major disruption for citizens and businesses in the EU 27. This would be the case, for example, in the aviation sector, where the EU suggested that for 12 months, certain air services be provided between the UK and the European Union under the condition of reciprocity. It's also the case for customs. The Commission proposed to add the UK to a list of countries to which EU countries can export dual-use goods, both civil and military. It's also the case for financial services, and we know how important that is. The Commission proposed for a period of 12 months, in the event of no deal, conditional equivalence to ensure that there'd be no there wouldn't be too serious disruption in the central clearing of derivatives. So all of these measures have something in common. They're temporary, they've got a limited scope, and they would be adopted unilaterally by the European Union. And we know on the other side, if there's no deal, that the UK would also take unilateral measures. The purpose of these measures is to protect European interests. It is not, and it could not be, to negotiate mini deals with the UK. It would not be possible for the UK, in this case, to retain the advantages of membership of the Union. The no-deal scenario would create, obviously, specific challenges in Ireland from a human and social point of view, as well as an economic and political point of view. The negotiations that we have conducted have demonstrated, President, ladies and gentlemen, strong solidarity on the part of the Union with Ireland, the EU 27 with Ireland together, the European Parliament with Ireland to deal with the serious consequences of Brexit. And I really do want to emphasise that in the case of a no deal, which we do not wish to see, but which could happen, the Union will demonstrate and express this same solidarity. And in such a scenario, the UK, for its part, would also have a major responsibility to come up with a solution to the question of the border on the island of Ireland. Ladies and gentlemen, even if we're doing our utmost to prepare for it, I want to say once again to you that the no-deal scenario has never been and will never be our preferred scenario. On the European side, the process for the ratification of the withdrawal agreement by the European Parliament member states is on track in the United Kingdom. The parliamentary debate, which the President mentioned, is at a point in time where there are serious responsibilities for all the UK political players, because the country has to face up to fundamental choices and has to make fundamental choices for its own future. Much has been said and written about the backstop. I've mentioned this, but in addition to the question of Ireland, there is another more fundamental question to which the British authorities have to provide an answer. What is the future relationship that the United Kingdom wishes to have with the European Union after its exit? On this point, the leaders of the EU have always said, and I shall repeat it, that we are open to several models. In the political declaration, which you can read, which is alongside the draft treaty, we took a line of the UK red lines, those that were set by Theresa May herself, and on behalf of the UK government. And taking account of these red lines, the political declaration provides for the point on which we found an agreement. That is to say, the very swift negotiation of a free trade agreement with customs and regulatory cooperation, which would be ambitious. President, I wish to say, and this is very important, that if the UK red lines were to evolve in the next few weeks or months, the Union would be ready immediately and open to other models of relationships which are more ambitious. Each of these models obviously is founded on a balance between rights and obligations. So we are open to reworking, if the UK were to modify its red lines, the content and the ambition of the political declaration. My feeling today is that there's not much time to succeed. This is why this is a serious moment, and we have to give this time, a brief period of time, to the UK Parliament, to the UK government, to have this debate and to take their decision. We, for our part, I suggest we remain calm, as indeed we've always been, determined, open, and respectful of the debate in the UK Parliament. In July 2017, I concluded my speech before your committee with an appeal to prepare together for Brexit calmly, objectively, and without being naive, in order subsequently to be able to focus on what is most important, our future in the EU 27. And I think that 18 months down the line, that conclusion remains valid. This future with an EU 27 obviously has to include a partnership with the United Kingdom, because regardless of any regrets we may have on Brexit, the UK remains a major country that I admire. It's a friendly country, a neighbour, it's an ally, and will remain an economic and cultural partner. But ladies and gentlemen, for our part, thinking beyond Brexit, we have to make use of the unity that was confirmed and consolidated between the EU 27 during the negotiation. We have to make use of that unity for a positive agenda, because Brexit, it's a negative negotiation. And this is what President Juncker in particular is proposing, and it's what President Donald Tusk wishes to see as well. We have to continue to use this unity to construct an agenda which marries the challenges of European sovereignty, building on national sovereignty, and the challenges of bringing things closer to the citizens. If you look at all of the challenges that your Commission is working on, challenges linked to migration, climate change, strengthening, deepening the single market, security and defence issues, digitalisation, social cohesion, I think, and I'm saying to you as a politician, which is what I am, that we will only be able to take on these challenges if we work together and are united, which is why I say, by way of conclusion, that I hope this unity that I've worked on humbly for the last 18 months, I hope that this unity will be used by the European leaders to build a positive agenda for the European Union, so that citizens and businesses are awaiting this impatiently. Thank you very much.
Merci bien, Michel Barnier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnier. The applause says it all. And obviously that applause is not just for what you said, but what you've done over the last few years. Now I'll give the floor to our colleagues. The first person to take the floor is David Crone from Group 1, and he's Irish. David, please.
For 3 minutes.
Monsieur Barnier, the single market and the Good Friday Agreement, which both came into being in the 1990s, combined to give the rise to a massive beneficial interdependence between all kinds of businesses in the two parts of Ireland, which now would be almost impossible to unpick without huge detriment. The backstop is the only meaningful way that the EU can give recognition to this international agreement, and we appreciate your skillful efforts and guidance. A no-deal Brexit, resulting in the re-erection of a border, would be a most serious setback for Ireland. Even though it was self-evident, the Irish government was taken by surprise yesterday that the Chief Commission spokesman, Mr. Shinas, chose this time to say explicitly that a no-deal scenario would mean a hard border in Ireland. But Brexit is not just about Ireland, it's about the European Union as a whole. Such is the great success of the single market in the European Union that businesses operate in a highly complex and integrated way. Brexit will leave a large hole in this best trading arrangement, the benefits of which some have taken for granted, but there will be huge dislocation costs if there is no orderly Brexit. Many businesses will know their Tier 1 suppliers, but many don't know their Tier 2, Tier 3 or Tier 4 companies that are in the supply chain, nor do they know the impact of Brexit on them. So, even member states that trade little directly with the UK will still trade with companies in other EU states that may be more exposed to Brexit-induced trading difficulties. Therefore, no matter how the UK may leave the EU with or without a deal, companies are calling for the maximum possible transition time in years, not months, to allow businesses to discover the ongoing fallout and to implement changes needed to supply chains and logistics, and for administrations to put in place the necessary inspections, document requirements and infrastructure that will give a cohesive and easy trading system. I thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Now, Gabriele Bischoff, the President of Group 2 from Germany. She's here.
Mr. Barnier, welcome again with us in the House of Civil Society here, and we value very much your engagement to come again to us to discuss the next steps here. And I have to say, I would really like to commend you on the diplomacy and also on the commitment you showed for this negotiation. And I think that you will set the role model for the European Union for public diplomacy, meaning that you took the energy not to come here to the House only in Brussels, but I know it as the trade unionist from Germany, as you came to all 27 countries and to speak to all stakeholders involved. And this is really a different political style, as we can see in the UK, as it was not even possible to consult the other political partners or the social partners in one country. And I think this will also be important for the next steps here to come. We said we all regret the decision that is taken, but I can also see that in many countries in the last days and week, we have joint initiatives of business, of trade unions, of politics, of civil society to say we regret it and we want you to stay. But I think it is also a message to the citizens in the UK. But I think you are right. We cannot allow ourselves to have any illusions here at the moment. We have to be very realistic. And I listened very carefully when you emphasized how great it was that we could keep the unity of the 27 member states. And I think in this state, this is very important, but I fear very much that the hardest part is yet to come. And the question is, how are you prepared for the next steps to keep this unity? Because we know that Brexit will harm, and whatever the scenario is, and that we have to make sure that we keep this unity also in the future. And as you said, for us as trade unions, it is very important that we make sure that citizens, workers, and business in the European Union are protected at all the steps, and that we might be wondering what is happening in the UK to understand it. But I think we are running out of time. And my last question is, there are debates now to say, okay, the UK may request an extension to Article 50, but we know we have the European elections coming up. So what is the strategy here? And if there would be some more time, you also stressed the question of time. What is the strategy here to make sure that the uncertainty and insecurity and crisis of the political system that is happening in the UK does not spread to the rest of Europe as the EU 27? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gabi. Now the floor is to Arno Metzler, probably from Germany, the president of Group 3, the West Europe. He is over there in the corner.
Mr. Barnier, President, colleagues, firstly, thank you very much for having come along. I think that you've done everything to avoid the consequences of a mistaken decision, although it was a democratic decision. You've done your best to manage the consequences of that. We have to deal with the worst-case scenario, and civil society has major concerns as to how this mistaken decision will be discussed in the UK. We have to maintain our contacts with civil society so that we can counter movements against the EU. And I think that image and cooperation with the EU needs to be done by maintaining contact with the UK. So we stand ready to have meetings. We want to prepare for a worst-case scenario, and we want to ensure that civil society organisations in the UK can receive assurances that we'll still maintain our bridges.
Vielen Dank. Now Jonathan Peel for 2 minutes, Group 1 UK. Jonathan is here.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Barnier, for coming back to us with such a clear statement at such a crucial point as we've hit now, with nerves really beginning to fray at the threat of no deal, which was described yesterday by George Osborne as Russian roulette. And I think one effect would be the early breakup of the United Kingdom if it did go over the cliff edge. But the key action will be in London. But I would ask that if there is a request to extend Article 50, that you treat it as sympathetically as you possibly can. Now, I'm coming from an old Protestant Irish tradition. I was brought up near the border, so I'm going to once again talk about Ireland. And I would urge that you have no compromise over peace in Ireland and no compromise over the backstop, because I think that is the excuse and not the reason. Now, I'm very grateful for your interest in Ireland, but you will need no introduction to Northern Irish politics. You will know that in 1998, 71% of Northern Ireland voted for the Good Friday Agreement. The DUP opposed it, and they got 28% of the vote against. 2 years ago, the DUP vote was still 28% in Northern Ireland, so they are not the only voice of Northern Ireland. It's essential that the voice of business in Northern Ireland is heard. It is essential that the voice of small and medium enterprises are heard in Northern Ireland, because they've grown exponentially as a result of the Good Friday Agreement. It is essential that the voice of the farmer in Northern Ireland is heard, because they will suffer exponentially if we crash out. So the voice of farmers is important, but above all, the voice of peace is important. We've been here before. As you may know, when partition, that was the original creation of the border, was discussed 100 years ago, that was only meant to be temporary. So please, please, can we do everything to avoid going back to a hard border? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Judy McKnight, always from UK, Group 2.
Thank you. And can I add my thanks, Monsieur Barnier, to those of others for coming back here today, but both for coming back here today and also for your hard work in the negotiations to date. And for listening to the voice of trade unions. I come from a trade union background and represent the TUC on the workers group here in this committee. And certainly progress has been made on the issue of workers' rights, but it nevertheless has to be clear that ultimately we weren't able to support the final proposition that you'd come to with the government because it did fall short of our concerns in respect of workers' rights, particularly the issue of workers' rights going forward and the need for alignment on a future ongoing basis. The two big concerns that I want to raise actually reflect what Jonathan has just said from Group 1. I mean, the big concerns I think many of us are feeling are the concern about the potential no deal and also a concern that there shouldn't be any movement on the issue of the Irish backstop. I mean, I think, you know, that people should be aware that yesterday Theresa May came forward with her supposedly Plan B, which was really her original plan with very minor modifications. On the 29th of January, next week, the government will be voting on where she has got to in any further talks with the EU, as well as a whole series of other amendments that have been tabled, which include proposals to seek to block a no deal, as well as proposals for a second referendum. And it's likely, if we are going to stop a no deal, let alone allow scope for other proposals such as a second referendum, then an extension of Article 50 might need to be considered. If I can just say briefly, the TUC objectives in these talks have always been maintaining hard-won workers' rights that come from the EU and making sure we get the same rights into the future, stop a job-destroying no-deal Brexit and winning a Brexit deal that offers tariff-free, barrier-free, frictionless trade with the rest of Europe, guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens working in the UK and those of Brits working abroad, and absolutely preserving the Good Friday Agreement, and ensuring peace in Northern Ireland, ensuring the continuity of the citizens' rights in that Good Friday Agreement, and avoiding a hard border, which a no deal would mean. And certainly, again, as Jonathan was saying, I think urging you not to compromise on the issue of the backstop. That is very important. So those are my basic question is, will you stand hard on the backstop, and is there scope for you to consider extending Article 50 if that is requested? Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I will ask all of you to stay strict to the time because Michel Barnier is also a very strict agenda. Jane Morris now, always from UK, Group 3, 2 minutes. She's over there.
Let me start again. I hope that doesn't count in my 2 minutes. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Barnier, for the superb role you've played to winning the backing of all 28 member states to no hard border on the island of Ireland and to the peace process. You know, as we all do, that both are interlinked. I'm from Belfast, and I've been involved in politics and peacemaking for the best part of my professional life. The greatest day of that life was the referendum result on the Good Friday Agreement that we fought for, and that was the overwhelming yes in Ireland, both north and south. The worst day of my professional life was the result of the Brexit referendum, and for many throughout the UK and particularly in Northern Ireland. Brexit is bad for Britain, but it's even worse for Northern Ireland. but I've always been an optimist. I'm well known in this place for that, and I believe there could be a light at the end of the tunnel. First, the people of Northern Ireland, as has been said here, voted to stay in the EU. And second, the citizens have the right, thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, to be Europeans and to remain Europeans no matter what happens. And I thank you for recognising that within the backstop, which I believe is our second best option. Obviously, our best option is for the UK to find ways to stay in. That's another story. I want to say quickly that the EU has been good to Northern Ireland, and your support for the peace programme in the Delors days was exceptional, and that's the symbol of the Delors peace programme. But I want to find a little criticism, only 16 seconds left. The EU has been good to Northern Ireland, to Cornwall, to the UK in general, but you've been too quiet about it. You don't shout about that loud enough. The citizens don't know it. So I want to ask you two difficult questions and one simple one. First of all, will you consider extending Article 50, and will you get asked the backing of the other member states for that?
Jane.
Okay, holding European elections, and finally learn the lessons of Brexit and start engaging more seriously with the citizens of the European Union. Thank you very much.
I understand all your passion, but please stick to the time. Stefano Maglia, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barnier, especially for your perseverance in these difficult negotiations and for being so steadfast in protecting the interests of the European Union, because this issue is not only about the UK, but it is also about the interests of those members which will also remain in the European Union. I want to congratulate you as well for your clear thinking and the leadership you have shown during this time of uncertainty and on this particular issue. I believe that your leadership has helped maintain this unprecedented unity, which most of us now have mentioned, and you yourself have mentioned as being very important, unity amongst the EU member states. As our President has said, we are in the middle of nowhere, and the question everyone is asking is, where will all this land, given the confusion surrounding the issue? What I think we are all clear about is that no deal is bad for everyone. It is bad for the UK, and it is also bad for the European Union. And unfortunately, every day brings us closer to this unwanted reality. With this in mind, I would like to encourage you, although I know that you have done your utmost and you will continue to do your utmost, and I want to assure you of our support. But I want to encourage you to try and make this one last effort to get the UK over the finishing line so that we can find a deal for the UK to get out in an orderly fashion. And of course, saying this, I am well aware that the UK must also help itself. If the UK leaves, it will be a third country, but it will not be any third country. But there are 40 years of relationships which are already behind us, and we as the ESC are keen to ensure we do not lose this great treasure of relationships. The political declaration in paragraph 125 talks about encouraging civil society dialogue, and I will end by asking you whether we can ask for your support for the setting up of a formal civil society joint consultative committee once the future relationship is defined. And indeed, I want to assure you again that the ESC will be ready and willing to take a leading role on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefano. Now, Jack O'Connor from Ireland for 2 minutes.
Thank you, President, and welcome, Mr. Barnier. As an Irish trade unionist, I want to acknowledge the support, the solidarity that Europe has extended to Ireland, as epitomised in every aspect of your own work and the way you conducted the business thus far. I think it demonstrates that it's now clearly understood the crucial importance of the European context for the Good Friday Agreement and the preservation of peace in Ireland, which is quite fragile. And I want as well to welcome your remarks about the continuation of that solidarity beyond the 29th of March. And in this regard, that solidarity will be tested, because if we cannot have a hard border in Ireland in an agreement. We cannot have a hard border in Ireland in the absence of an agreement either. And that presents challenges for everybody. I think, Mr Barnier, you very well understand, as do many of the European leaders, that it's not just about solidarity with Ireland, and that solidarity is key to the sustainability of the European project and indeed democracy in Europe, given the political trends that are underway. I want, if I may, to finally say this, that it is also crucially important that in the narrative around the conduct of the business over the next number of weeks, that you and your team and all the other spokespeople are sensitive about the degree to which statements can be used by the hard right Brexiteers, and that you would pay particular attention to what Judy McKnight of the TUC has just said about the importance of signalling to workers in the UK that Europe is not anti-UK workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Michael McLaughlin from Ireland is there.
Thank you very much, Mr Barnier and Mr President. I'd like to add words of congratulations for the hard work you've done. I know you visited civic society groups in Ireland and Dundalk during last year, and it was very, very welcome. I do wonder, are we being a bit too pessimistic, particularly about recent developments, that in the UK now, in the Parliament particularly, there is a lot happening day by day. Even this week, parliamentarians are trying to do things that you mentioned. They are trying to take a hard deal or a no deal Brexit off the agenda, and I think we have to look at that. They're also debating potentially more time and an extension of Article 50. It's very, very late in the day, it's the 11th hour, but those people are trying their best. And I think if we look also, we had 670,000 people marching in London, and those people are looking for Europe to help them, the same way as people in Gdansk are, the same way as people in Budapest are. So there is change, there are people out there, and the very fact that we're faced with a deadline that these people didn't set, and the fact that these things are happening late in the day, I don't think that should mean we should stop listening. It's very serious business. It doesn't get much more serious than this. There was a car bomb in Northern Ireland this weekend, so people's lives are literally at stake in this. So 6 months, or someone mentioned the European elections. I mean, we'll find a solution to the European elections. Where there's a will, there's a way. Okay, so it's not too late to listen and give the UK space, give people in Parliament space. The EU is supposed to be an idealistic project. We're supposed to be looking at the big picture. It doesn't get any bigger than this, as I said. When thousands of people are marching on the street, when parliamentarians, the directly elected representatives of the people, are looking at ways out and looking at solutions, progressive solutions, trying to marginalise the hardcore Brexiteers and trying to find a way forward, I think we have to think about that. I think we have to look at that. And those people are crying out to us to listen. I think we should listen, as my colleagues have said.
Thank you so much, Michael, also for staying strictly in the time. Now, Michalis Antonio. 1 minute.
Monsieur Barnier, first I want to join everyone in saying that no-deal Brexit is totally unacceptable by the business community. You very well know that some member states are affected more than others. Cyprus is expected to be the second most hit economy in case of a no-deal Brexit. You also know that Cyprus is still trying to overcome the consequences of the enormous economic crisis of 2013. Nevertheless, the biggest of our worries in case of a no deal is the fear of having hard borders established between the Republic of Cyprus and the 2 British sovereign base areas that exist today in the Republic of Cyprus. This is an extremely negative scenario, sir, not only for people living and working therein, but for all Cypriots. Could you therefore please confirm that under any circumstances, no hard borders will be established within Cyprus? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Irene Oldfather for 2 minutes.
Thank Thank you, President, and thank you so much, Mr Barnier. As a Scottish and UK member, can I thank you for coming today, and can I also thank you for the leadership, consistency and diplomacy that you have demonstrated in these negotiations, in which I think can only be described both in the UK and in Europe as a political nightmare, with the biggest government defeat in Parliament history in the UK, illustrating just how frustrated and divided people are. But like my colleagues from Northern Ireland, I agree a positive solution here must be found, and I think for the first time in a long while I am much more positive that there's a very strong desire to take no deal absolutely off the table. Nobody wants 2 more years of the same, but I do think there is a deal breaker emerging, and that is the possibility of a second referendum. And I remind colleagues that when Ireland voted first on the Lisbon Treaty, the vote was 53-47. Just over a year later, on a higher turnout, that vote reversed to 67-33. I've been working in communities across Scotland holding town hall meetings, and I am convinced that if there is a second vote, that we will see a much more positive result. So can I ask Mr Barnier, if there is a request from the UK to do so, will he, as other colleagues have asked, will he be inclined to grant an extension to Article 50, which would allow a people's vote to take place, and a clarity emerging from this situation that hasn't been able to be found so far?
Thank you so much. And last but not least, John Bryan from Ireland.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Mr Barnier. I want to compliment you also, like the other speakers, on the unity you've achieved in keeping the 27 member states together. And again, I want to repeat the question asked by both Gabby and Jane and others. Can Article 50 be extended beyond July this year? Because as an Irish person, we have great concerns about the total integration of the Irish and the Northern Irish economies. They're absolutely integrated. Thousands of trucks pass every day. Food goes up and down. 50% of the lamb produced in the north comes south, 30% of the milk. It's totally integrated, and any hard border there, along with interfering with the peace process, would wipe out the livelihood of tens of thousands of farmers, small businesses and employees. The UK economy is totally dependent on Europe and certain countries to supply food. They're only between 50 and 60% self-sufficient in food. Ireland supplies billions of euros worth of beef, Denmark pork, Ireland dairy, Spain fruit and veg. Any disruption of this at the ports or at customs borders would result in huge delays and huge losses. So what we're asking, President, is what are the contingency plans by the Commission to protect the single market if all this food cannot jump WTO borders? And
John, sorry, you've passed. Thanks. Thank you all. Sorry to be strict, but the time is going over. Michel, tu as la parole pour donner les réponses que tu retiens.
You have the floor, Mr. Barnier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Luca.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Luca, for giving me the opportunity to answer all of those questions. And firstly, ladies and gentlemen, I was personally very touched by your appreciation of my work as part of the task that President Juncker and the heads of state and government and the President of the Parliament gave me. I deeply regret Brexit. My first vote when I was 21, a long time ago. We were voting 21 countries. We voted in France for UK, Ireland, Denmark and Norway for their accession, and I was part of the young Gaullists at the time, and I was campaigning for yes, and I've never regretted that vote because I think there is strength in unity. So I'm very sorry about this situation, and I hope to lead these negotiations responsibly. I was given a mandate by the heads of state and government, the 27 heads of state and government. So I'd like to say to Gabriel Bischoff and Jean Morris and Irene Oldfather, who were asking about possible extension to Article 50. Well, I have an opinion. I might have an opinion on that subject. A few months ago, I was saying we need decisions more than we need time, actually. Well, I don't know whether postponing or extending will be raised, but it's the heads of state and government, the 27 of them, who have to answer that question by consensus. Some of them have said to me that if that question is raised, and they have actually spoken to the UK government, well, why would we do that? What would be the purpose of that, and for how long would that be required? And then there's another question around the European Parliament elections, and that's to say that an extension should not interfere with the democratic workings of European institutions. I can't say any more on that subject, but once again, this is, for the moment, it's just a theoretical issue. You know, we haven't had a request for extension. And let me remind you that Article 50 goes from March 2017 to March 2019, and that is for the preparation of a withdrawal treaty. And we have that withdrawal treaty here. And because I've worked on it, I'm able to tell you that there is no other withdrawal treaty that is possible if we want to provide legal certainty for responses to all of the issues raised by Brexit. And then we have the political declaration. And I said myself that we would be open in coming weeks and months to reopen it, make it more ambitious if the UK changes its own red lines. So we'll see whether that question arises, but it will be in the hands of heads of state and government. David Coogan talked about statements. I think we all have to be careful about what we say, but just let me remind you that the European Commission has clearly said through its spokesperson, I could give you a statement, it's to avoid misunderstandings.
All it can, deal or no deal, to avoid the need for a border and to protect peace in Northern Ireland. The EU is fully behind Ireland and has expressed on numerous occasions full solidarity with Ireland. Et donc, vous devez relier.
So, if you look at that statement, you can reread that. But what I've said is that we want to express our solidarity. There has been no interruption or weakness in solidarity of the 27 with Ireland over the last months, and that will continue to be the case in coming months. However, if we're facing a no deal, we will, together with Ireland, who is directly concerned territorially speaking, and with the UK, we'll have to find a way to carry out checks. If there's no hard border, well, we will still have to do checks and controls somewhere. So that, Mr. Coogan and ladies and gentlemen, that will be it's something that we owe to consumers, to protect consumers and to protect companies within the single market. So we'll have to find an operational way of carrying out checks and controls without putting back in place a border. Thank you, Ms. Bischoff, for what you said. You know, I've always thought I'm a politician. I was a member of the European Council twice a commissioner. And I always thought that such an extraordinary and difficult negotiation couldn't be done in secret. It's not a standard negotiation. So from the start, thanks to President Juncker, who allowed me to do this, we've done this transparently. We've said things openly, always. The 27 member states were informed in real time. I've been going back to the European Parliament once a week for the last 18 months, and I've visited each capital twice, and we will continue to do that work. And it's for another reason as well, Ms. Bischoff. If everything goes well and we get an agreement on a divorce agreement on Brexit with the Parliament and the UK government, we're going to have to enter into another negotiation, a much more important one, immediately about the future relationship, a partnership in all areas. And I can tell you that this relationship will be translated into two or three treaties in a number of years, and these will be mixed treaties, and that will mean that each of the national parliaments in the 27 countries will have to express unanimous agreement with this. So we can't wait until that point to be open. There shouldn't be any surprises, and that's why I've been to the national parliaments 2 or 3 times, and I was in Lisbon last week, because there should be no surprises. We should be building this together. And Ms. Bishop, I think that's the right method to prepare the future: transparency, democracy, dialogue and respect. And I've also answered on the question about extension. So thank you, Mr. Metzler, for what you said about our work. Now, this isn't work that I do alone. I was lucky enough to be part of an exceptional team. My assistant, who is German, Sabine Vaillant, Stephanie Bizot, the whole team did fantastic work. They're extremely competent and extremely involved. I want to encourage you, Mr. Metzler, beyond Brexit, to find a framework for continuing dialogue with British society. I said to the President that we need to find a way of entering into dialogue with that new special third country, of cooperating with them. Just recently I met the director of a hospital in France who was specialized in cancer treatments, and they created a network of hospitals using EU research funds, and one of the hospitals involved in that network is the Cambridge Hospital. So obviously that should continue, and British students should continue to participate in Erasmus. There should be programs of cooperation between universities that should continue, but this will be within a different legal and financial framework. So Jane Morris, Jack O'Connor, John Bryan, Peel mentioned Ireland. I won't repeat what I've already said, but I'll just repeat why this is an issue that is close to my heart. You talked about Jacques Delors. Now, as European Commissioner, I was in charge of regional policy and cohesion. I was in charge of managing the peace process, or I was involved with the peace process, and I was in Dungannon with a group of women who were benefiting from European funds. There were around 20 of us. And I will never forget that some of those women cried during the meeting. They said, please, let's not have that starting again. I will never forget that meeting. It's not just an issue of products and borders. It's a question of men, women, peace. This is a European Union country, and for the last 20 years, since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, we've supported that process with our policies and with the European Union budget. Now, obviously, the backstop isn't the only issue within UK debate. I will continue to listen on this, including to listen to companies in Ireland and Northern Ireland. You will have understood from what I've just said that we are firm on this issue, that the issue of Northern Ireland should be dealt with now within the withdrawal treaty and not at a future time when we don't, you know, we're not, which we don't know when it is. Now, Brexit has no added value. Nobody has ever shown me evidence of that, and I've heard from many people, nobody's ever demonstrated the added value, and that includes Mr Farage. But where Brexit is most negative, where it has the least added value, is in Ireland. And I'm just saying that to show you why I am so determined on that matter. Judith McKnight talked about dialogue with trades unions and workers. All I can say there is that the UK wants to leave. So when it leaves, it won't be represented in the Council. It won't be bound by European directives. We can find ways to establish the level playing field, but the UK will be free to make any law it likes. What we could find is a way to avoid competition and protect consumer and worker rights as far as possible. But Brexit cannot involve business as usual, even if we have this get this withdrawal treaty, because the UK will have left the EU. Mr. Malia, thank you for your contribution. The negative consequences of Brexit. Well, if we look to the future, I can tell you that we've worked with the UK on the political declaration. It can be improved, but we wanted to envisage an unprecedented agreement. There is no country in the world where we do what is in that declaration. When you look at all the subjects covered there, the economy, internal security, police and judicial cooperation, foreign policy, and so on. It's a very important relationship. Now, we could also look at possibilities for working with civil society. I responded to Mr. O'Connor on the border and not having a hard border. Michael McLaughlin, I would say there, yes, I follow the UK debate. I respect it, and that's why I don't want to comment on the possibility of a second referendum. That entirely corresponds to the British, that decision, and I'm thinking of Ms. Oldfather there as well. the issue in the House of Commons in London is that we have these two negative majorities. We have a negative majority against the deal, unfortunately, and probably a negative majority against no deal. But what the government and parliament now need to do is to create a positive and majority. That's what we need, and I hope that this dialogue that the Prime Minister has opened up will give us a positive majority. Mr. Atounou, of course, I'm very attentive to the issue of Cyprus and these two sovereign bases, which will remain British bases. It's not the same as Ireland. If there isn't a deal, we will find a solution. I've been with the President of Cyprus, and we will. I've been in permanent dialogue with them, and we will find a solution there. So I hope I've answered all the questions. Just another couple of comments. In the UK, we have the consequences of Brexit, which we are managing in the best possible way. But there are also the lessons of Brexit that we can draw. Why did the British vote that way? Why in so many regions do we see votes against Europe? You know, because Europe doesn't protect sufficiently, because it's abandoned its industrial policy. Let me recommend that we don't confuse the consequences and the lessons of Brexit. We shouldn't confuse populism with the popular feeling that was expressed in the UK. We must respond to the popular feeling either through our policies, changes in the in the Union or in the member states. Whatever your ideas, whatever your sensitivities, your responsibilities, we need to speak out. We need to open the debate. The worst thing for Europe is silence. Populists use silence against Europe. We need to fight against that by speaking. We may have different opinions. This has been shown in this room today, but we need to talk about the progress that Europe has brought in terms of peace, not just in Ireland, economic development. If we want to face up to the challenges that are ahead, we need to stay united together. If we disintegrate, if we're not together, we will all fall under the influence of China or the US, and that's not something that I would like to see. Thank you for your attention.